Japan is made possible by this and other public television stations.
One of the most fascinating things about the Japanese is that they all obey the rules. Unlike most Western cities, the people will all wait patiently until the lights change.
And very rarely does anyone break the rules, for this is without a doubt the most law-abiding society on Earth. You may be late for a crucial meeting, there may be no cars in sight, yet you abide by the rules and cross when the lights tell you to. Where does this devotion to law and order come from? What are its roots, and what effect does it have on modern Japan? These citizens of Nikko, just north of Tokyo, are gathering to celebrate the memory of the man who above all is responsible for the law-abiding nature of Japan. The Napoleon of Japan, the first shogun, Ieyasu Tokugawa. Twice a year people gather at his shrine, dressed in the costumes of the 17th century, to honor the man who unified Japan and gave it 250 years of peace, isolation, and prosperity. This shrine serves both as a mausoleum for Ieyasu's ashes and as a place of worship. For on his death in 1616, he arranged for his own deification to strengthen his family claim to rule Japan as military generalissimos, as shoguns. This gate is nicknamed the Livelong Day Gate because of the time one could spend admiring the intricacy of its design. It was built to overwhelm its visitors with the glory of the Tokugawa family. But the Tokugawa shoguns didn't only rely on glorious monuments to sustain their rule. 200 years before Napoleon, they set up a centralized bureaucracy to minutely control the newly unified nation of Japan. And the citizens of this parade reflect some of those positions. Armed men to enforce peace, clerks to write the laws, priests to enforce rule of law with the power of religion, bureaucrats to administer the rules. pride of place in the procession goes to the young men dressed as samurai warriors. It was the warriors of the Tokugawa clan that finally defeated their enemies by successfully storming the formidable defenses at Osaka Castle, killing all those who threatened the rule of the Tokugawas. The now all-powerful Shogun moved his headquarters to a marshy fishing village and built this fortress as his base. It's now the home of the emperor in central Tokyo. He founded what some have called the first police state, with heavy emphasis on hierarchy, discipline, and authority. The peasants who composed the vast majority of the population were forbidden the planting of tobacco or the making of sake, in order to prevent their attention from turning from their sole task of growing rice. This was a state that even dictated the size of doll your child might play with, a state that threatened to arrest a merchant who entertained too elaborately or wanted a third story added to his house. At a feast, no more than 2 soups could be served, and silk underwear was definitely out. The Tokugawa shogunate tried to restrain the use of sumptuous golden embroidery in women's kimonos. The fact that they constantly had to repeat these rules suggests that in this area, at least, they had little success in enforcing their ideas. Though the rule of the shoguns has since lapsed, their values of hard work, discipline, and hierarchy still continue. This store, Cebu, is one of the chicest shops in the Ginza, Tokyo's most fashionable shopping area. But this standard of customer service is typical of stores all over Japan. To an American, or any Westerner for that matter, a visit to a typical office can be very confusing. At first glance, it seems to have no pattern at all. There's no receptionist, just row upon row of anonymous workers with no divisions, no closed offices to denote who is superior to whom. But once you know the rules, all becomes clear. The senior man, and it is always a man, sits at one end of a long line of desks with his senior assistants at either side. The most junior sits farthest away from his boss and will gradually move up this line as his seniority increases. In a conference room, the seating is done very carefully in order of rank. The most important person has the most important seat, which is always the one farthest from the door. Thus, the less important you are, the closer you will be to the entrance. This, however, has to be modified on a bullet train. Here, the best seat is considered to be the one by the windows facing front. The second best, the other window seat, then the aisle seats, then the ones in the middle. If ordinary life in Japan seems appallingly regimented and controlled to us, consider some of its advantages. Tokyo is the world's safest city, with crime a fraction of similar cities in the West. The policemen on morning parade at Tokyo Central intend to keep it that way. But how do the police keep Tokyo so quiet? Here, murder is almost unknown. Armed robbery, for instance, occurs 252 times in New York for every one time in Tokyo. This is a typical Tokyo suburb, not that far from the city center, and neither particularly rich nor particularly poor. Yet it feels as safe as a small town in Iowa, and statistically, it's probably safer. Mr. Yagi is a tatami mat maker, the mats used in most Japanese homes to sit and sleep on. But he has another job in this suburban village. He's a part-time policeman, patrolling the area, checking up on every home and business at least once a year. In this way, the police keep a detailed record of everyone and everything that occurs in their neighborhood. This benign but rigorous policing is greatly aided by one feature unique to Japan, the ubiquitous local police station. There's one every few blocks, where citizens can get advice and help. In lively entertainment areas like this, the neighborly police technique of the suburbs is more difficult to maintain. The main problems in areas like this are burglary and drugs, largely amphetamines. But the police do have time for less serious crimes. These teenagers are being warned against cigarette smoking underage. It's a police presence that these youngsters seem to accept easily enough. It's unlikely that youngsters in America would have reacted so calmly. It's an intrusive police presence by Western standards, but one that is supported by most Japanese as the price they must pay to live in harmony in their overcrowded land. This young man has been picked up by the police for questioning back at the police station. If accused of a crime, he'll almost certainly be found guilty. Such is the awe in which authority is held, that only 1% of those charged are found not guilty. And if the young man is sent to prison, he'll end up here. This is the Kawagoe Juvenile Prison, a prison for less serious offenders under the age of 26. The Japanese authorities are fond of the short, sharp shock school of prison thinking, and there are plenty of physical drills in the daily routine. A wide range of voluntary lessons are available to prisoners. One of the more popular is the meditation class, run by a local monk. The blow on the back is punishment for lessening the considerable concentration needed to meditate properly. This, of course, is voluntary. But meditation is also used by the authorities as a punishment in which the prisoner is forced to meditate for hours in solitary confinement, and is punished further if he moves from the meditating position. These young hairstylists will leave prison with a hairdressing certificate that will ensure them jobs in the outside world. Tough though this regime is, the prison authorities are proud of the fact that the vast majority of its inmates will never need to be imprisoned again. This, they claim, is because of extensive job training within the prison. These Kyoto children are starting their school day in a system which, judged by exam results, is the most successful in the world. In comparative tests, Japanese children have consistently beaten their Western counterparts. Particularly in math and science, they have always scored much higher than their American contemporaries. However these results were achieved, it certainly wasn't because of luxurious school buildings. This is very typical of most schools, and the Japanese government spends less on education than America. No one knows whether teaching math by the traditional abacus helps these children achieve such good results. What is clear is that the traditional Japanese respect for hierarchy means that teachers are granted a far more honored role than in Western schools, which allows them to cope with classes that often have more than 40 children. The children themselves have been told many times by their parents of the importance of doing well at school, and the government backs them up by making the school year the longest in the world. They're in the classroom 2 months longer than American school children. One major difference in Japanese schools is that many jobs done by adults in the West are done here by the children themselves. The meal is prepared by adults, but served by children and then eaten in the classroom, thus avoiding the need for expensive dining room facilities. The Japanese justify this not in terms of money saved, but for the beneficial effects of children learning to help one another, fostering a spirit of group responsibility. In this Kyoto junior school, all the cleaning is done by students. No adult cleaners are used at all. So perhaps it's not surprising that there's no graffiti and little vandalism. As you progress in school, the pressure increases in the remorseless drive for ever greater educational excellence. The discipline gets more rigid. Uniforms are universally required. Homework takes several hours a night for every child. The system does have its advantages. It produces a highly qualified, literate workforce, and produces it from all schools, not only an elite few. Another surprise for those Western educationalists who believe that high standards can only be achieved through tracking is that everyone, of all abilities, including the mentally handicapped, are taught in the same stream. And everyone moves up together. No one is left behind or promoted beyond his or her group. As ever, the group counts for more than the individual. But despite the high standards in math and science, all is not well with Japanese education. Much of the English language education is of a low standard, taught by teachers who themselves can't speak English with any fluency.
I know the girl whose mother is a pianist. そのお母さんがピアニストである少女を知っているわけですね。はい、okay, now this time number six.
The subject is taught by rote learning, as is so much of Japanese education. And most students finish their school days unable to do more than mumble a few words of their favorite English song.
Such an easy game to play.
These children are put under greater pressure to work harder than any other school children in the world. And it's a pressure that has some ugly side effects. Bullying at school has become a major problem in Japan, with thousands of children having their lives made a living hell by the humiliations heaped upon them. This is a reenactment from a training film made for teachers to alert them of this growing crisis. Victims are usually those who don't fit in with the system, children who've lived overseas, for example. And in a few dozen cases, the bullying has proved too much for the child to bear, and he or she has committed suicide. There's general agreement that the main cause of the bullying is the pressure on the children to pass their exams. Pressures that mean that most children go to extra classes at night after normal school has finished. Expensive extra classes like this one in central Tokyo, where the slogan 6 hours sleep fail, 4 hours sleep pass, is a way of life. The reason these teenagers work so hard and why their parents pay thousands of dollars for them to attend is simple. Their future depends totally on which university they get into. In a rigidly stratified society like Japan's, getting into a top university is an absolute guarantee of future success. The exams are very largely a test of your memory. No original thinking is required. And having survived this examination hell, the student awaits the results, which are conveyed in a unique Japanese fashion. These students are celebrating getting into the best university in Japan, Tokyo University. which claims half the prime ministers since the end of World War II as its graduates. But the extraordinary thing is that having worked harder than any students in the world, when they get into a university, even as prestigious as this one, the pace of work slackens dramatically. At this university, which is a sort of Harvard and Yale rolled into one, the workload is pretty light for most students, and it's the one chance in their lives to really relax and enjoy themselves. The fact that they got into this university means that major Japanese companies will be fighting to employ them, whatever their academic records. The reason they're so attractive to their future employers is not because of what they'll learn, but because of the friends and colleagues they'll make. Lifelong associates who will, in the future, always provide mutual assistance as they climb the corporate ladder. Entrance to Tokyo University is based solely on academic merit. Not even the son of the emperor himself can get in without passing his exams. But there are some areas of Japanese life where the merits of an individual count for very little. No matter how brilliant this child is, he will never be prime minister. These girls will have difficulty marrying the men of their dreams. However capable the teaching, however hard they work, these children are still destined for the bottom of Japanese society. For these are the children of the Burakamin, a name that has replaced the now abusive Eta, the untouchables of Japan. It's a subject about which the Japanese are very sensitive, and if this program were ever to be shown in Japan, this sequence would almost certainly be cut out. The reason some 2 million Japanese are now outcasts in their own country dates back to feudal times. This screen shows a typical 16th century town, with gaily painted houses and well-dressed citizens. Outside the city wall, it's a very different world of poorly dressed peasants curing the skins of animals. In a society of vegetarians, those who dealt with dead animals were seen as unclean and treated as a lower and separate class. And the divisions have carried on into the modern day. In most Japanese cities, there are Burakamin ghettos, ghettos which look identical to the rest of the city, but ghettos that every single Japanese knows about. This street in Osaka is the dividing line between a Buraku area on the left and a non-Buraku area on the right. The people on the street all look the same. There are absolutely no physical differences between the ghetto dwellers and the rest of society. The only way the non-Japanese would know they were in a Buraku area is by noticing the unusually high number of shoe shops. The Burakamin have continued their association with skin curing into a 20th century domination of the leather trade and all its associated industries. Like the traditional drums played at every Japanese festival, as the skin of the drum is made of leather, their manufacture is largely in Buraku hands. The Burakamin tend to work for small manufacturing firms which pay the lowest wages and can offer no job security. As unemployment continues to increase, it hits the Burakamin first and hardest. For them, there is no security of a job for life at a large company. The Buraku ghettos used to have some of the worst housing conditions in all Japan. But new government spending has begun to make this deprivation a thing of the past. What government hasn't stopped is the hatred of the Burakumin, expressed in slogans like, "Kill all Burakumin filth," and "Burakumin animals get out." But worse than the graffiti and the ghetto housing and the poor job prospects is the problem of marriage. Marriage in Japan is a union between two families, not two individuals. You can be sure that the families of the happy couple thoroughly checked out the background of the bride and groom before allowing the marriage to take place, to make sure neither party came from a tainted Burakumin background. This couple married in spite of their parents' prejudice. He is a Burakumin. She is not. As a result, Mrs. Ueda has been totally rejected by her family. She has expressed her feelings in a poem.
My mother said, "Why must you marry someone from the Buraku? I didn't put you through college for this. From now on, I've never known you. You were never my child." And my older brother said, "Are you doing this to spite us?" So for the love of a man, I had to stop being a daughter, sister, and friend, and came to this village all alone.
The Uedas have weathered their family's disapproval and have a very happy family life. Not everyone has had such good fortune. This couple, unable to marry, dressed up in their wedding finery, took this photo, then killed themselves. There has always had to be a safety valve for all Japanese, faced as they are with this tradition of stern authority requiring hierarchies and conformity. In any city of any size, there are tens of thousands of places where the average man and woman can let their hair down and forget their problems. This is one of the most popular. It's a karaoke bar, where everyone gets a chance to stand up and sing their favorite song. People do sometimes get the impression that the Japanese never relax and unbutton themselves. 5 minutes in one of the innumerable bars like this one would soon change their minds. And directly in the shadow of the Hiroshima Peace Dome, just yards away from the epicenter of the atomic bomb blast, Japan's most popular pastime is getting underway. It's baseball, Japanese style. The Japanese are absolutely fanatic about this American import. City and regional rivalries are every bit as intense as they are in the US, with loyal fans traveling in huge groups to games in neighboring cities. Frequently, American players are recruited and come to Japan to play, many becoming national heroes.
That's pretty good. Yes, I think we're pretty safe in this house.
In the Shogun's Japan, release from the tensions of life was to be found in the lusty pleasures of the floating world, paramount of which was the kabuki theatre. Once a year in the little town of Kashimo in central Japan, the local people put on kabuki plays in their centuries-old local theatres. Here, local women play the female roles, just as they once did in the Japan of the shoguns before they were banned as being too licentious and their places taken by male actors. Here in Kashimo, the traditional forms are meticulously observed, as rice farmers are transformed into kabuki heroes. A common theme in kabuki is the clever commoner outwitting his social superiors, a theme likely to prove almost as popular to modern audiences as it did in the past. While middle-class audiences enjoyed kabuki, the aristocracy supported older and more exotic theatre, the theatre of No. This is the theatre that the Shogun approved of. No subversive tales of commoners tricking their betters, but ancient stories of duty, honor, and obedience. The stage is bare, the orchestra and chorus hidden, and the masks are skillfully manipulated by the actors to suggest changing emotions. The No theatre attracted only a minority audience. It was the woodblock prints of a 19th century artist like Otomaro that was the universally popular art of the day. And his portraits of popular courtesans from the brothels of Tokyo were bought much as posters of rock stars are bought today. They were so commonplace that they were used as packing paper for porcelains being shipped to the West. In fact, this is how Westerners first became aware of these beautiful works of art. They were made in enormous numbers, with many different colors skillfully printed one on top of another. The land of the Shoguns was a land of great natural beauty. A land untouched by the Industrial Revolution that was changing the landscape of the West. A land where pilgrims dressed in white could peacefully carry out the traditions of centuries. The Japan of the Shoguns was ending just as the first cameras began to document it. A world of rice farmers and large bustling cities with sophisticated shops. A ranked world where everyone knew their place. The porter. The postman. The fisherman. The samurai. The Tokugawa shoguns had kept Japan separate from the rest of the world, with an effective bamboo curtain that makes today's iron curtain look like a rusty sieve. A world that, though far from backward, had opted out of the Industrial Revolution. On July the 8th, 1853, this uniquely isolated world was forced into wider contacts with the rest of the planet. That morning, villagers in Tokyo Bay saw large black vessels belching smoke. These were the black ships of the American Navy, commanded by Commodore Matthew Perry, portrayed here rather unflatteringly with his large, foreign nose. Perry forced the Japanese to open their ports to foreign ships and trade. He brought many gifts and remarked that he was much encouraged by how easy it was to introduce foreign customs and habits to the Japanese. Local officials took considerable interest in this model steam train, making this detailed sketch of it. In less than 20 years, they were operating their own railway system. The Japanese establishment, terrified by its military weakness, was determined to catch up with the West and embarked on a crash industrialization program. Whole railway systems were imported from the West, and the Japanese rapidly learned to operate them. Machinery was imported, especially to manufacture textiles, and in an echo of the late 20th century, the Japanese were soon producing better and cheaper cloth than the West. Buildings were constructed in Western style. As ever, the Japanese proved themselves to be the most adaptable of people and took to modernization more easily and with less pain than any other third world country. One reason was the traditional emphasis on education, which meant that there was a large educated class hungry for knowledge from overseas, and in particular knowledge of the science of war. The memory of being defenseless against the power of Perry's naval guns haunted the Japanese, and they made sure that it would never happen again. When the Russians fought Japan in 1904, they thought they were up against a quaint, backward nation and were shocked by their overwhelming defeat. The first time ever that a non-white nation had defeated a white one. A defeat made even more devastating by the destruction of the Russian Navy by the Japanese fleet. In a mere half-century, Japan had developed into a major military and industrial power.
Perhaps the most interesting thing about the Japanese is the speed with which they as a people and as a nation can adjust to change. The stunning military victory over Russia at the turn of the century astonished the world. No one could believe that a Madam Butterfly nation like Japan could defeat Imperial Russia and industrialize so rapidly.
The prestige that these victories brought the military was enormous. And as the 20th century progressed, Japan's idea that all their problems could be solved by force grew in popularity, with disastrous results for Japan's Pacific neighbors and ultimately for Japan itself.